Have you ever been in the market for a new weapon? You've been saving your hard-earned coins for a pretty long time, but you just don't really know what to buy. You don't want to waste your coins on buying a weapon, then realising it's not really as good as you thought it was, then relisting it. The price might have dropped, you're going to lose money on fees, and it's just a waste of time. Well, today we're going to be taking a look at a few weapons from Skyblock. I asked in my Discord server as to what weapons people thought were the worst value for money. We're going to take a look at those weapons and, well, figure out if it's really worth buying the weapon. Now, something to note is, if a weapon is in this video, doesn't mean it's a bad weapon. It just means, well, people don't think it's great value for money. And being good value for money is different to being a good weapon. And when we determine if a weapon is good value for money, there's one main thing that we look at. Its value relative to how good it really is. We can look at alternatives to that weapon, how good the alternatives are in comparison to the weapon in question, and how much the potential alternative weapon actually is. We also must consider how vital that weapon is to, well, your gameplay, your progression. If it's a weapon that basically unlocks a lot of the game, regardless of if it's expensive or not, you can't really argue for it being good value for money. So let's get to it. In the past I've talked about good value for money weapons and you know, I think it would only be appropriate to talk about bad value for money weapons and maybe weapons that you should avoid if you're on a budget. Now, the first weapon we're going to talk about is the Bouquet of Lies. Now, this is definitely not a weapon that I would have personally put on this list because, well, every time I've used it, it seems to be pretty good in terms of value for money. However, it's been mentioned a few times, so let's see if it's really bad value for money. A Bouquet of Lies is going to set you back around about 8 million coins, and it has base stats of plus 220 damage, plus 300 strength, and plus 50 crit damage, which, to be honest, I think for the price is pretty strong. If we compare that to something like a Livid Dagger, which is a little bit cheaper, but people don't really consider this weapon bad value for money, because why would you? It's very cheap. It's 210 damage, 60 strength, 100 crit chance, 50 crit damage, and 50 bonus attack speed. Going off the stats alone, you'd probably say that the Bouquet of Lies is going to deal more damage. You do get a few more extra perks with the Livid Dagger, but the right-click ability on the Bouquet of Lies is great. Now, the Bouquet of Lies is of course an upgrade from the Flower of Truth, and the Flower of Truth itself is a decent weapon. The Bouquet of Lies is just better, and you pay a little bit extra, but it's not really expensive. And let's quickly test it out. We have a clean Bouquet of Lies, and to be honest, this really is not... Like, the test doesn't mean anything, because everyone's going to be at different stages and dealing different damage. However, with a clean Bouquet of Lies, I can deal 200k damage, plus the right-click ability is really what it's all about. That's a good ability. In my opinion, the Bouquet of Lies is not bad value for money. I would probably say it's good value for money. Let's move on. Well, before we do, if you are planning on purchasing anything from the Hypixel store, make sure to use code NITROS, it gets yourself 5% off. You should subscribe to the channel. If you watch the videos and you haven't subscribed, please make sure to do so. You should join the Discord server, it's linked in the description of this video. We offer Slayers and Dungeon carries, so if you need carries and want to carry and make some coins, make sure to join. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at the Mosquito Bow. Now, this weapon is going to set you back around about 97 million coins, and its stats are as follows: plus 251 damage, 151 strength, and 39 crit damage. It also gives you 20 vitality. Its ability, Nasty Bite, means that when you're sneaking, it costs 11% of your max mana, but you deal plus 19% damage and you heal for 2 times the mana cost. The main thing is this bow is not a short bow, and if it's not a short bow, in terms of just general usage, it is pointless. And it's 100 mil. Now, the reason why it's so expensive is because of its crafting recipe. It has a lot of tarantula silk, which is expensive. Just because the craft cost is expensive, it might have intended to be a good weapon back when Spider Slayer was introduced, but it just isn't that anymore. It is bad value for money. I don't know why you'd even choose to go for a Mosquito Bow, but just stay away from it. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so next up we have the Yeti Sword. Maybe not a weapon that I would have put in this category, but quite a few people have reiterated that they want me to talk about the Yeti Sword, so let's see what it's like. Of course, it's a mage weapon, so our plus 150 damage and plus 170 strength don't make a huge amount of difference. It gives us plus 50 as base intelligence too. Its right-click ability is what we're really looking at though. It throws a chunk of terrain in the direction you are facing, deals up to 47,000 damage, a cooldown of 1 second with a 250 mana cost. Off the bat, it seems relatively similar to a Midas Staff. It's not the same, but it has a pretty strong ability that has a 1 second cooldown and a decent mana cost. For comparison, if we take a look at a Midas Staff, this one right here has got the most value paid for it. If you pay any more, it's not going to make a difference. And its ability is going to deal 101,000 damage, when this one's obviously plain as well. At the same time, the cheapest Midas Staff you can get is 360 mil, and the cheapest Yeti Sword you can get is less than 40 mil, and it deals around about half of the damage. Okay, so we've bought a Yeti Sword, we've just bought a completely clean one, because it seems to make more sense to do so. And of course, this is the right-click ability. Helps if you sometimes literally just spam it at the floor. But let's see what sort of damage that we deal. 1.2 million? I'm on the wrong reforges. Okay, our actual damage is more like 1 million? 2 million? Yeah, it's more like 2 million. And this is a completely clean Yeti sword. Not gonna lie, I don't really see how this is bad value for money. The weapon is about 40 mil. It's basically a baby Midas staff. And it's around about 10% of the price for Midas staff. So we're just gonna move on. I wouldn't say this is bad value for money at all. Now, a lot of people have said that Hyperion is bad value for money. I disagree, but I can understand why you'd be of that mindset. Cost you 1.7 bill, and if you want to be able to deal good amount of damage and for it to be usable throughout the game, you're going to need quite a lot of magical power, you're going to need a decent armor set, you're going to need a good pet. It isn't just a 1.7 billion coin weapon, you're going to need a good setup around it, it's going to cost you billions of coins. But once you've got that set up, you can do whatever you want. Sure, there'll be certain areas of the game where you might need a Terminator, but for the most part, Hyperion is going to get you by for pretty much everything. Not everything, but majority of later game things. Now, there are alternatives to a Hyperion for a fraction of the cost, but none of them are going to be as good or as easy to use as a Hyperion. And I know not everybody's going to agree with what I've said, but that is the bottom line. You know, people say you can use a Fire Veil or a Spirit Scepter with an AOTV and then also like a Voodoo Doll, and using maybe something to heal like a One of Atonement or a Florid Sword, using maybe 3 or 4 items together. And maybe it's just because I'm not great at like navigating through hotkeys and getting everything in the right order. And I mean, I know the Hyperion's 1.7 billion, but it's expensive. It's one of the most expensive weapons in the game. I wouldn't say it's bad value for money though. Even though it's the most expensive, you know, if you turn up to a Kudra party without Hyperion and with a 5 Veil wand, a zombie Florid Sword and a Voodoo Doll, majority of people are going to kick you out. That being said, I'm not saying that there aren't some good alternatives that you could probably use and get away with. I'm just saying for me, you know, it kind of just makes more sense. And I wouldn't say the Hyperion is bad value for money, even though it's expensive. But I'm just going to move on. Now, talking of the Hyperion, we've got to discuss the Valkyrie, because if the Hyperion is pretty much the best mage weapon in the game, it is the best mage weapon in the game by far, then really, it only makes sense for the Valkyrie to be the best melee weapon in the game, and it is nowhere near. It is just not even close. And because obviously it's a Necron's Blade, it carries the price tag of pretty much an unscrolled Hyperion, which makes sense because you could take this weapon and turn it into a Hyperion for a very small cost. Of course, this doesn't have scrolls, you'd have to put scrolls on as well, but 1.1 billion coins for this weapon is an absolute rip-off. Like I said, I'm not debating why it costs so much, it makes sense why, but what I'm saying is for this product, for this weapon, the price is just not good. So the clean stats of a Valkyrie are 270 damage, 145 strength, 60 intelligence and 60 ferocity. The only thing that sets this weapon apart from pretty much anything else on the game in terms of melee weapons is its base ferocity. However, even if you're going for a max ferocity build, you don't need a Valkyrie because you can use Fatal Tempo on a different weapon and still achieve max ferocity with ease. So realistically, our stats here that are actually useful are 270 damage and 145 strength. Now, a fragged Shadow Fury gives us 310 damage and 160 strength and 60 crit damage and 40 speed, which is better than a Valkyrie. Without a doubt, there's no debate. This is better than a Valkyrie. I guess the argument for the Valkyrie is you could put scrolls on. It's a melee weapon though, so I mean, maybe the implosion isn't really that useful, but it deals more damage, and that really is it. Even a Livid Dagger, which costs 5.5 mil, isn't really that much worse. And to rub salt into the wounds, you've got an Aspect of the Dragons for 1 million coins, which is worse, but not really that much. The Valkyrie is really the weapon that everybody forgot. It's the weapon that the admins forgot. It would be nice to see it actually be good, but it's just not. Now, there's a lot of people who say that the Giant Sword isn't good value for money. And there's also a lot of people who say that the Dark Claymore isn't good value for money, which is interesting because realistically the Dark Claymore is the best melee weapon on the game. And the Giant Sword is probably in the top 5, probably top 3. So how could these weapons not be good value for money? Well, let's take a look. So the Giant Sword's base stat is plus 500 damage and plus 1 swing range. It does have a right click ability, however, it's pretty useless. It's going to set you back around about 122 million coins. It has 2 gemstone slots. The base damage on the giant sword is substantially higher than anything we've basically seen yet, which is good. Now you can pay an extra 20-25 mil or so and get yourself a Dark Claymore, which is very similar to a giant sword, but better. It gives you plus 500 damage, plus 100 strength, plus 30 crit damage, and plus 2 swing range with 2 gemstone slots. It doesn't have a right click ability. It's a melee weapon though, and yeah. Really, I mean, just looking at this, you're going to deal pretty substantially more damage with the Dark Claymore than you are with the giant sword. It gives you an extra 100 strength. And, you know, an extra swing range is nice too. These 2 weapons used to be so much more expensive than they are now, but they have dropped quite a lot over recent times. And that isn't because the weapons have been changed or the weapons are bad. That's because of an issue, a fundamental issue with the game, and that is that melee weapons are just a little bit pointless. What do you really need a melee weapon for? There's very few things. I've talked about this before, I'm not going to go into detail. You've got a select few slayers and a select few other niche parts of the game where you need a melee weapon. Other than that, mage weapons or bows are just substantially better. Melee weapons are only really particularly useful in early game, and anything past early game, melee weapons are kind of obsolete. Unless you're doing either Sven or Revs, really. The Berserk class in dungeons is pretty underused too, and that is because of, well, melee weapons just, in comparison to other options, not great. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Midas sword. It gives us 290 damage, 220 strength. It used to be the best weapon in the game, way back when. Its ability Greed means that the strength and damage bonus of this item is dependent on the price paid in the Dark Auction. The maximum bonus of this item is 120 if the bid was 50 million coins or higher. Well, that's changed. Now the maximum bonus is 225 if the bid was 250 million coins or higher. This Midas staff, this Midas sword right here is fragged. It's got the golden fragments on it. There was 250 million coins paid for it at the Dark Auction, meaning that's going to give us a bonus strength of 225 and bonus damage of 225 too. That means our base stats are plus 395 damage and 325 strength. However, it's selling for 598 million coins. Regardless of how good this weapon is, even if the highest bid paid for could be 1 billion coins and that bonus 225 was multiplied by 4, it would still have the same issue. And that issue is that it is a melee weapon. There's nothing else to it. There's no right click ability that sets it apart from any other melee weapon. It might just do a big number of damage. So regardless of how tempting it might be to go ahead and pay a massive premium for that weapon, I'd just, for the moment in time, advise that you don't. Considering you've got something like a Dark Claymore which has more base damage and, well, less strength, for a fraction of the cost, it makes no sense to buy the Midas sword. It really doesn't. And it's a really cool concept, and I'm happy that they've changed it, but it still suffers from the same issue as every other melee weapon. Anyway, we're going to move on to the last weapon, and it's pretty obvious what it's going to be. It's the Enrager. Nobody buys this weapon really hoping or wanting it to be good. It's more just either... I don't know why people buy it, actually. And I just bought it to make a video about it. I thought it would be funny. It's just going to be a pain to sell. Let's talk about it. It costs about 3.5 billion coins, and its base stats are 270 damage and 150 strength. So, yeah, not that much better than Aspects of the Dragons, which cost 1.5 million. Also very similar to the Living Dagger, has slightly more base damage. It gives you slightly more base strength. However, the Living Dagger gives you plus 50 crit damage. Yeah, this just ain't it. And I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it because it's pointless. No one's gonna buy an Enrager anyway, and no one was considering buying an Enrager to do damage. It's needless to say, if you want a high damaging weapon and you have 3.5 billion coins, there's better options for literally a couple of % of this price. So that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you all have enjoyed. If you have, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.